Nebula has full immunity to bleed, poison, and shock effects. Nebula will begin each fight with 3 indefinite self-repair charges. When she runs out, she will gain another charge after 10 seconds. Each time the opponent deals more than 110% of their attack rating in a single hit, Nebula will spend 1 charge to gain a self-repair buff, recovering the damage dealt over 5 seconds. If stunned, while self-repair is active, it is lost. Self-repair and its charges are immune to ability accuracy reduction. This is a very powerful regeneration ability. However, it will only proc if a single hit does more than 110% of the attack rating. So small basic attacks will not proc this self-repair. Nebula's shock debuffs will inflict energy damage for 6 seconds. Heavy attacks have a 100% chance to inflict a shock debuff. While holding block, Nebula builds up 1 amp charge every 0.65 seconds. Each time an immunity prevents a shock effect on Nebula, gain 5 amp charges. This has a max of 20 stacks. Each amp charge reduces the opponent's ability accuracy by 20% if they are a #robot. And performing a well-timed block will convert all amp charges into shock debuffs on the opponent. In order to get the benefits from the Special Attack 1 and Special Attack 2, Nebula must first parry the opponent and convert amp charges into shock debuffs. The Special Attack 1 has a 100% chance to inflict a Power Lock debuff, lasting for 1 second per shock debuff on the opponent. There is a 100% chance to inflict Power Drain, depleting 12% of a bar of power per shock debuff on the opponent as well. Using the Special Attack 2, Nebula will remove all personal shock effects on the opponent. For each shock removed in this way, she inflicts 2 shock debuffs, each dealing energy damage over 3 seconds. Using the Special Attack 3, Nebula gains a Weapon Overcharge passive, lasting for 25 seconds. While active, Nebula has a 65% chance to gain an amp charge when making contact with the opponent. While active, any contact with the opponent has a 75% chance to inflict a shock debuff. With an Awakened Nebula, while the opponent is suffering from at least 1 shock debuff, Nebula's attacks gain between +8 to +25% combat power rate based on signature level. Nebula is a very tricky character to play. Most people have a playstyle of using the parry ability in order to stun the opponent and then do damage. However, anytime you parry or perform a well-timed block with Nebula, she will place those amp charges onto the opponent as shock debuffs. And you want to make sure that you are in the right situation in order to place these shock debuffs so that they are not wasted. Building up shock debuffs is as simple as holding block. Now you might think, well, maybe I can just hold block and absorb attacks until I get to where I want to be. But she doesn't have the highest block proficiency, and she can take a lot of damage simply by holding block. Your best strategy is to use your dex or your dodge mechanic as often as possible. So starting from the beginning of the fight, do not start the fight with a parry, as can often happen as you time the opponent to hit right as the fight starts. Do not start with a parry, or if she is already starting with any shock or amp charges on her, she will place them immediately onto the opponent and they will be wasted. Instead, you will want to start either with a light attack to intercept the opponent or dash back and then begin holding block. As you hold block, you will see that you will build up these amp charges. Again, you do not want to parry the opponent until you are in the right situation. Your best bet is to dex back and bait the opponent into using heavies and special attacks and then strike back in order to build up your own power gain. Now, if you want to build power faster and you have an awakened Nebula, you can use that heavy attack to place a shock debuff on the opponent. This will allow her to have an increased combat power rate, allowing you to get to your Special 1, Special 2, or Special 3 a lot quicker. Ideally, you will want to build up to 20 amp charges. That is her max. But now that you have your amp charges, what do you do with her? This depends on the fight that you are in. If you are looking for power control, you can use the Special 1 attack. This will allow you to power drain and power lock the opponent per amp charge that is converted into a shock on the opponent. So if you are wanting to use the Special 1, what you will do is bait the opponent into attacking, parry and stun the opponent. This will turn all those amp charges into shock debuffs on the opponent, and then fire off your Special 1. This will power lock and power drain the opponent pretty much down to 0 power. So this is a great strategy if you need that power control ability. Most people will opt to use her Special 2 instead. Her Special 2 can deal great amounts of damage if done correctly. So you're going to use the same strategy. Build up your amp charges to 20, making sure you're not wasting them with a parry attack. Build up your power using your basic attacks to a Special 2. Then, as you are ready to fire off your Special 2, bait the opponent, parry, stun the opponent. This will convert your amp charges into shock debuffs. Now, before you fire off that Special 2, let those shock debuffs run for about the length of a regular combo. So after you parry, stun, and convert into shock debuffs on the opponent, hit them with 4 to 5 basic attacks. This will allow those 20 shock debuffs to run about halfway through their life cycle. This is already going to be doing damage. Then fire off your Special 2, and this will refresh all those shock debuffs and double them. You will now have 40, and you will see she will do massive amounts of damage when she has that many shock debuffs on the opponent. So one more time, you will want to build up your amp charges to 20, build up your power to the Special 2, parry and stun the opponent, converting your amp charges into shock debuffs on the opponent. Then use a basic attack or a basic combo with 4 to 5 hits. Let those 20 shock debuffs run about half their life cycle, and then immediately fire off your Special 2. This will refresh and double each of those shock debuffs up to 40 if you started with 20 shock debuffs on the opponent. If you feel that your timing is off, you do not have to use that 5-hit combo. You could just parry, stun, convert the amp charges into shock debuffs, and then immediately throw your Special 2 if you feel that you don't have enough time in order to throw a 5-hit combo. Now, using her Special 3, it will allow you to place shock debuffs rather easily onto the opponent. And if you were to build back up to a Special 2 and gain all your amp charges again, this can maybe make it so that you go over that 20 shock debuff threshold. Maybe you can get to 30 and convert 30 into 60 shock debuffs when you finally shoot off that Special 2. However, I will say this is really only useful using her Special 3 when you have an Awakened Nebula at a high sig, because if you use the Special 3 and then start placing shock debuffs and building up to that Special 2, more than likely her weapon overcharge ability is going to run out, and those shock debuffs are going to run out by the time you get to your special 2. This is based on her playstyle having the dex and bait the opponent so much. But if you do have her awakened at a high sig, let's say her max sig, and she has 25% increased combat power rate, this will allow you to get back to that special 2 a whole lot quicker and allow you to maximize her damage. Again, she does not need to be awakened in order to get insane amounts of damage off that special 2, but you can increase it even more if she is awakened and if you can use that increased combat power rate to get back around to your special 2. So again, I would only use the special 3 if Nebula is awakened and probably at a higher sig level. One other use for the special 3 is if you somehow find yourself at that special 3 threshold and have somehow already used your amp charges and they are no longer available, whenever that weapon overcharge ability is active, it does give Nebula a 65% chance to gain an amp charge on contact. So you can start to build up amp charges without holding block by using the special 3. But unless you've made a mistake, it is unlikely you're going to end up at your special 3 with no amp charges. Nebula also does become much better with synergies. If you are using the Proxima Midnight synergy, she will actually start the fight with 10 amp charges already active, which gives you a big head start on building those amp charges. So if you do have Proxima Midnight, and if you are good at playing Proxima Midnight, absolutely include her on a team with Nebula. It will make building those amp charges a whole lot easier. Finally, I just want to mention her self-repair. It is very, very powerful. As you can see in the gameplay here, I was actually able to survive multiple hits while that self-repair was active. But once more, that self-repair will only proc if a single hit does more than 110% damage. If it does not, if the opponent's just using small basic attacks, then they can take down Nebula without those self-repairs ever activating. Overall, Nebula is a very tricky character to play. It does require a lot of skill, but if you have the skill and the ability to play Nebula, you will not be disappointed. You can generate massive amounts of damage in the game, and you can have massive amounts of power control in the game as well.